All right, folks, today's topic is what happens when we die. And I put this out. I've had a couple of discussions privately about this recently. It came up in a couple of different ways. The rich man and Lazarus parable came up in our recent Think Deeper podcast episode, this week's episode, actually. And so it's been on my mind, and I kind of thought, okay, well, I've got a grasp on that. I want to put my take out there, and I put a poll on my Facebook group, the Church Reset group, and got a lot of responses there. Put a comment 1, 2, or 3 on my personal Facebook page, and I think there's 117 comments. So there's a lot of interest in this. There's a lot of opinions about what happens when the Christian dies, and so there's okay. Well, I'm trying to figure out my plan of attack here. I've been working on that. There's so much to get to, and I don't want to be on here for an hour, but let's get to what we can. There are, as I see it, 5 different views of what happens when the Christian dies. The first, and I think this is the most prominent one, especially in the churches of Christ, is we go where Lazarus went, Abraham's bosom, paradise, where the thief on the cross went, a place of waiting. In fact, I'm sure you've all seen, I'll pull it up right now, there we go, the diagram of in this world, there's the saved and the lost. There is that middle one, and this is what we're talking about. After you die, it's this middle circle, if you can see that on your screen there, of paradise and torment, and a great goal for a chasm that you see there in the rich man and Lazarus in Luke chapter 16. And then after that, you go straight from whichever one you've been pre-sorted into, paradise into heaven and the reward, torment into hell and condemnation after Judgment Day, or upon Judgment Day. So that is, I will call it the majority view in the churches of Christ as I have seen it. Another one that had a decent amount of support, at least in my comment section, was unconscious rest, or some call it soul sleep. They're drawing on 1 Thessalonians 4:13 of those who have fallen asleep, and that we will not all sleep, but some, those who are alive, who remain when Christ, they'll be transformed, and all those who are asleep will rise up. Jesus used that phrase for the little girl he rose from the dead, that she's just asleep. You also see it in 1 Corinthians 11, I believe, that some are sick, some sleep. And so that is a phrase that is used to say, all right, we fall asleep, we're unconscious until that day of judgment. Another one that I've seen a few times is when you die, you fast forward to the judgment day. You are now outside of time, and so you are at the judgment the moment that you die. And everybody, the moment that they die, it ends up at that same place. And so even while life, earth goes on here, is like a very quick fast forward button, immediately transmits you to the day of judgment. And then 2 other ones. One is that the Christian goes to heaven when they die to be with God and where he is. And then one other one that's kind of a variant of that is that paradise is heaven, that's one and the same, that there's not that blurring of the categories, that dividing line as we just saw in the diagram there. And the 2 different ways of looking at it are paradise is heaven now, like there's been a change, that those 2 things have been brought together, or the paradise always has been heaven. So 5 different views. Again, the paradise, Lazarus view, Abraham's bosom, the unconscious rest view, the fast forward to Judgment Day view, heaven, or that paradise and heaven are the same thing, so that we'll just say heaven. So there's really 4 views, one being a variant of the 4th. Going through them briefly, I reject the sleep one because of things like the Transfiguration with Elijah and Moses. There just seems to be consciousness, and what Paul's looking forward to is not being asleep, but going to be with the Lord and things like that. I also reject the fast forward to Judgment Day. If that were the case, how was Samuel brought back? Again, Moses and Elijah, Abraham's bosom. Abraham, there was a place where Lazarus went to hang out with Abraham, and it depends on how literally you take that parable, but it's certainly there. So I don't go for those. So the main 2 we're looking at are the rich man and Lazarus divide the chasm, and you die and you're in torment, or you're in rest, Abraham's bosom, paradise, whichever one you call it, or you go straight to heaven and you're with the Lord. And so part of the confusion that comes up on this topic is brought about by the terms of hell and Hades, and you'll see this especially in the Churches of Christ. We don't do a lot of creeds. We don't recite the Apostles' Creed, but a lot of churches do every Sunday, a lot of denominational folks, and the Apostles' Creed depending on the translation, will say that Jesus descended into hell and rose again. And so there's this thought that, well, okay, he went to hell, and why was Jesus in hell? And he was taking on our punishment. Now, it should say Hades, and a lot of them translate it Hades. That's what it is. And that's what we're talking about here. Hades, it's called Sheol in the Old Testament. It is the realm of the dead. Everybody goes, to Sheol, Hades, to this place of the dead, good and bad. And so you see the rich man and Lazarus both go. They're in the same general place. There's just a chasm, a division between the two. And so that's what we're talking about, is the realm of the dead and what the realm of the dead looks like, and if that has changed at all. That idea of Jesus descending into hell or Hades comes from 1 Peter 3:18 and 19, of Jesus descending into, in fact, let me screen share my Bible here. Let's see, there we go. And there, you should be able to see it now. 1 Peter 3:18, I'll read that for us briefly. For Christ also died for sins once for all, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which also he went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, those spirits that were disobedient in Noah's day. So we have that view, but again, it's not that he descended into hell, it's that he descended into the pit, into the grave, into Sheol, into Hades, in that place. And so that creates some of that confusion. So the question is the rich man and Lazarus division, is what is depicted there, is that still applicable, and is that where we go? We go to Abraham's bosom, we go and it's a nice place, it's seems like a great place of rest. Obviously Lazarus was very much out of his misery and in a better place there. And Luke 23:43, of course, the thief on the cross, it was told him that you will be with me in paradise. And so that's generally considered to be the same place, that Jesus was taking the thief on the cross with him to the same place that Lazarus was, the same place that Abraham was, the waiting room for heaven. The question about that is God there? Are you with God the Father? And in the rich man and Lazarus, it's Abraham that's doing the talking. There's not an indication that he went to be with God, it's he went to be with Abraham. And so there's a place of the saints, the place of people who are awaiting heaven, but you don't see God himself there. And somebody could say, well, God's everywhere, but then he would be in torment too. So he's not there in that sense. And so I guess the question is, if you're going to say that we go to paradise when we die, the first question I would ask is God there? Are you going to be with Jesus, with the Son? Are you going to be with the Father? Or is that what you're going to? Because that seems to be what Paul believed in. If you go to Philippians 1:23, I'll pull this up on the screen as well. You'll have to squint to make sure you can see the passages here. But Philippians 1:23, where Paul says, I am hard-pressed from both directions, having the desire to depart and be with Christ, for that is very much better, yet to remain on in the flesh is more necessary for your sake. So Paul's conception of it was, when he could either live here on earth and continue his ministry, or he could go be with Jesus. Well, is Jesus in the waiting place? Is Jesus in paradise? Is Jesus there with Lazarus and Abraham, or is Jesus with the Father in the throne room of the Father? Well, in Acts 7, at the end of Acts, where Stephen's about to be stoned to death, he's looking up and he sees Jesus at the right hand of the Father. And of course, that's where we believe Jesus is. And so if Paul's going to go be with Christ, he's going to be where the Father is, where the Son is, where Jesus is on the throne. So that seems to me to indicate heaven. Paul also says in 2 Corinthians 5, verses 6 through 8, therefore, being always of good courage, and knowing that while we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord, for we walk by faith, not by sight. We are of good courage, I say, and prefer rather to be absent from the body and to be at home with the Lord. So you have that sense of you're going to go be with your Lord. You're going to go be with Jesus. That's why I asked, if you believe in the paradise view, the rich man and Lazarus division view that is often taught, and I guess I can go back to that diagram real quick. Is Jesus there in that paradise, in not in heaven? Is Jesus there in Sheol, Hades, place of the dead? Because Paul sure seemed to think that's wherever he was going, he believed that's where Jesus was. Well, I don't hear it taught usually that we go and be with Jesus, or this kind of this concept of where is Jesus now? Is he also in paradise? He told the rich man, "You'd be with me in paradise," but Jesus also rose again and ascended into heaven later on, and so it's very complicated here. I'm going to argue that Paul was planning on going to heaven. Paul expected to wake up in heaven with the Lord, and part of that is the question that I brought up earlier. One of the views is paradise now in heaven. Well, when Paul in 2 Corinthians 12 said in verse 2, where he talks about the vision, and he's saying, well, I know a guy, but not me, but it's generally considered to be it was him. He says, such a man, in verse 2, was caught up to the third heaven. That's usually considered to be the heaven where God is. The sky heaven, the space heaven, and then above that is the third heaven, is that rendering that usually you'll hear taught. So he was caught up to where God is. And then in verse 4, he says he was caught up into paradise, thought to be very much the same thing. And then in Revelation 2, verse 7, you have a very similar idea. To him who overcomes, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. Well, the paradise didn't seem to be there with Abraham and Lazarus and all that, and so you got a lot going on here. So I'm going to take a second and step back, just recap real quick. I do believe we go to heaven when we die. The Christians go to heaven when we die, and that the paradise concept, as we see it in the rich man and Lazarus, and as was promised to the thief on the cross, have fundamentally changed. Does that make sense? If you're following, again, thank you guys for the comments. I've got a question here. The question of the prejudgment. This is something I do want to get to. You may cover. Thanks, Carter says you may cover it as we go through the live, but I'm curious as to your answer with the story of the rich man and Lazarus. Does it not seem like prejudgment before Judgment Day? That is a very good question, one we're going to get to here in a minute. And then Trebmaster, thanks for a comment as well. I spoke to a Coptic Orthodox priest that said the Christians go to an antechamber of heaven. Not sure why. And I think generally the paradise view almost views that as an antechamber of heaven. Again, the waiting room of heaven. But I'm not really sure that is. But that also raises the question, if we go right to heaven, what about the judgment? What is the point of all of this? Why are we still waiting on something, all that? So we're going to get to that here, the questions of this view here in the second half of it. But I want to make the case here real quick. And I'm going over a lot really fast here. I'm not going to do like an hour live stream on this. I'm hoping to keep it to 25, 30 minutes. So if you have questions, make sure to drop them, and I'll get to them as I can. But in Ephesians chapter 4, you have this quotation from the Old Testament, but Paul changes the quotation a little bit. In verse 8, it says, therefore it says, when he ascended on high, he led captive a host of captives, and he gave gifts to men. The opposite was actually in Psalm 68:18, that he ascended on high, you have led captive your captives, you have received gifts among men, even among the rebellious, that the Lord God may dwell there. And it's about God kind of trampling the nations and making them exalt him. And you remember when they left Egypt, the gifts were given to them that they ended up using to make the tabernacle to glorify God. So I think that's what that's in reference to. But here it's in reverse. He gave gifts to men. And Paul turns that around to talk about spiritual gifts and the leadership of the church and all of those things. But you've got this descended, ascended thing. He descended into the lower parts of the earth. I think that's very much the same thing Peter was talking about in the verse we looked at. And then in verse 10, he who descended is himself also he who ascended far above all the heavens, so that he might fill all things. Well, Jesus descended in his burial in the earth, as he said in Matthew 12, like the sign of Jonah. And then he rose again. He ascended far above all the heavens. He might fill all things. But part of this ascension in the same context is he led captive a host of captives when he ascended. This is a view called the harrowing of hell, that Jesus went down to Hades, to all those saints that were kind of in the waiting room, the Lazarus, the Abraham, the thief on the cross, whoever, and said, all right, I've overcome. The sacrifice has been made that cleanses you from your sin. Why couldn't they go be in heaven? Well, they weren't cleansed of their sins fully. Their sins were forgiven, but they weren't forgotten. Well, now with the perfect sacrifice of Jesus, that's what they were waiting on. And he went and took them out of there and ascended on high and led captive the host of captives and took them with him, to be with the Father. And so when Paul says, I'm going to go be with him, on this side of the resurrection, it's my belief, because of verses like this, that when the Christian dies, that the wall, somebody said it's an antechamber to heaven, that comment we had just a minute ago, the wall of the antechamber, the wall of the waiting room got knocked down. That's what Jesus did. And I think, to me, that's why one of the reasons why this matters is it's very cool of like what happened between the cross and the resurrection. In Matthew, you see people raised from the dead and come walking around Jerusalem. I think that's a significant indicator of what happened, and Jesus knocking down the gates of Hades, right, as his church was going to do that. And so the indication that all of this adds up to me is the Christian goes to be with Jesus, to be with the Father, to there where Jesus is when we die, as Paul said so. And so let's see, you got this one. Ernie of Swordmaster Publications does not like the harrowing of hell idea at all. I know one of the causes for this, I mentioned I've had some private conversations about it. It's come up in one of our group chats, so that's a pretty interesting one as well. And so Ernie's a real sharp guy, and I'd be very interested to hear his pushback on all of this. But who are the captives that he led high? And it's in past tense there that he led them high and gave gifts. He gave the spiritual gifts that, like, these are things that have happened in Ephesians chapter 4 when Paul wrote that. I think that's what it's talking about. So let's finish up with some of the questions that this raises. Why a judgment day? If you already go to heaven, what's the point of the judgment day? Well, in that paradise torment rendering, you've already got a prejudgment. I would argue that we're judged here on earth. Like the saved are the saved here on earth. And I wrote a whole book on Christian assurance, You Are Saved, where I could say you can know that you're saved. You can know where you're going. You can know, John says, you can know you have eternal life. You don't need the judgment day for that. The judgment day, of course, he talks about, or the Bible talks about in a number of places, that our deeds are going to be exposed. Those things are going to be brought to light. That's part of what happens at the judgment. And so we don't really need to, it's not a mystery. I guess that's what I'm getting at here. It's not a, boy, fingers crossed, let's wait on the final results for the scorecard to be read off. No, you know now. Lazarus and the rich man knew then. I mean, there's just, you work this backwards. I don't think that the judgment day is supposed to be a surprise, other than those who had false assurance and are still there at the time of the judgment. And so, so there's that question. Well, then, again, if we go straight to heaven, why do we need that last great day? Well, the resurrection. And I think this is one of the reasons why this discussion matters, is it reveals your view of the bodily resurrection. I think a lot of people think the resurrection, because I asked somebody about this, well, what do you think happens at the resurrection? Well, we're raised, our bodies are raised, but then we shed our bodies when we meet him in the air, and so it's like we're back in our bodies for like 5 seconds, and then we just go, well, what's the point? And you look at what Paul had to say about this, and then that 2 Corinthians 5 text about our earthly tent, but we've got a house, in heaven, like the permanent form that we're going to take. In Philippians 3:21, we're going to conform to the body of his glory. We're going to have a body like Jesus did post-resurrection, which was very much a physical body, very much a body that, it's not, when he says not flesh and blood, but it's real. It's a body that's not, we're not Force ghosts like at the end of Star Wars, right? We're not just the blue outlines of ourselves in heaven for all of eternity. Whatever it is that is raised on the final day, that's who you're going to be. Then we meet him in the air. And I've got this question of addressing 1 Thessalonians 4, so let's go there. Let me get my screen share of the text back on. Let's see. 1 Thessalonians 4 is where we're going. The Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we shall always be with the Lord. So this is, the question of why, if we're transferred to heaven at our death, why do we need the final day? This is what happens. If you're dead, you need to be risen. You need to be brought up out of the grave, given your new body. Those who are alive at that time will be transformed into their new body. And so in both of these things, and Carter's getting at this here exactly right, man, we're equal parts soul and body. And this is something we have to realize with this is, if you go be in heaven right now in soul only, you are not fully there. Your soul is there now, but you are not, because you are soul and body. The human is soul and body, and so you are not in your eternal form. You are not who you're supposed to be. You're not able to even eat of the tree of life because you don't have your body back yet. You will get your body back and be that. And then the other question is, when we meet him in the air, and this is the controversial thing about the new heavens and new earth, you don't have to believe in the new heavens and new earth to believe this, but it follows a little bit more if you do, that when we're resurrected and we meet him in the air, the earth is renewed, destroyed, recreated, whatever term you want to use, renovated. There's different terms for that out there. And then we come back in, kind of like when grandma and grandpa come and you go and meet them in the driveway, and then you all come back into the house. That's one of the things that could happen. Or we meet him in the air in our new bodies, and we go with him into heaven. We go back up with him as he did when he ascended bodily to live there forever and ever. And so, does that make sense? That when you receive your resurrection body on the final day and your judgment of your deeds for good or for evil, as he talks about in John 5 and other places, then we'll end up in our eternal home, body and soul together forever. As that's our full eternal life, what we're looking forward to. I think we very much underestimate and underemphasize the body's role in the resurrection, in eternity, in what Jesus is doing to defeat death, getting your body back, getting your glorified body back, a better body that is not limited like you have right now, is part of that hope. And so you can go be in heaven in soul, in like who the internal spiritual part of you goes to be in heaven, but you're not fully there. You're not alive in that sense. You're still waiting on something. You're apart from the body. And so again, those things that 2 Corinthians 5 talks about, of apart from the body with Christ, but the ultimate goal is to be with Christ in the body, is what he's kind of hinting at there. And then Carter brings up 1 Corinthians 15 as well, about the body there. And again, it says flesh and blood won't inherit the kingdom, but that's a very complex. It's not just a body won't inherit the kingdom. You're getting a body at the resurrection, an imperishable body that's not limited like your current flesh and blood body is. And so it's going to be something different. We'll be transformed and all of those things, as we're seeing here in 1 Thessalonians 4 as well. And so where do we go when we die? You can say paradise as long as you believe that you're going to go be with God in paradise. If you believe you're going to a waiting room and you're not actually going to be with God. Oh, there was one other one I was going to get to. In Revelation 6, verse 9, it's the saints, the souls under the altar, asking, "How long, O Lord?" Well, the altar would be in heaven. The altar would be in the heavenly temple that Revelation is kind of focused on. The souls are there under the altar. They're at the heavenly temple. That would indicate something to me as well. And so, again, I don't know. I don't really care that much where the Christian goes after death, as long as you agree with Paul that we're going to be with Jesus, and as long as you believe with the text that Jesus is with the Father. What that looks like, if you want to say that they also come to the waiting room in paradise and they're there with you, I would disagree with you, but that makes more sense. But the idea that we're kind of in a waiting room apart from them and waiting to see them, that doesn't hold. That doesn't hold up according to the text. And so, let's see. The question is, Jesus omnipresent. Paul taught that we live with Christ whether we are awake or asleep. Paul obviously didn't believe he was living in heaven with Jesus while he was awake or alive. It's true that, if I'm understanding you correctly, that being with him, he's omnipresent. And that's kind of the point I'm getting at paradise. You can say, well, he's omnipresent, so he's in paradise. Well, no, Paul was talking about specifically a specific meeting place to be with Jesus, and that's where he expected to go upon his death. Not years and years and years later at the judgment when that happened, and not fast-forwarding to the resurrection, but where Jesus is now, where Jesus was at the time of Paul's writing, is where Paul expected to go. So that's how I have it. I know, as I said, there was like 117 comments, so there's a lot of disagreement on this, and I'm very interested. Okay, so there's a disagreement that Jesus isn't omnipresent. Okay, Jesus is omnipresent, but would you say that the rich man went to be with Jesus when he was in torment? Well, of course not. Again, Paul had a specific place in mind when he talked about going to be with Jesus, and so saying he's omnipresent does not mean you're going to be where he is with him, all those kinds of things, because you could just say, well, I'm with him right now. And so Paul was very much looking at something that was better. You're in Jesus' presence at all times, but he was looking forward, says it's better for me to leave where I am now, even though right now he's in Jesus' presence, to be somewhere else. And so the idea that Jesus is omnipresent means wherever we go, we're going to be with Jesus. I wouldn't agree with that, unless you were willing to posit that the rich man also went to be with the Lord. That just doesn't calculate for me. And so again, some questions to answer. I'm just laying out my case here. I would love to see your case in return. On the one hand, this is something that I like, things like this, that we can agree to disagree. We don't have to come to the same opinion on this. As I said in a post recently, this sharpens us. When there's not fellowship at stake over this kind of thing, it sharpens us to open our Bibles together and say, well, what about this? What about that? That's why I like doing these things, and I hate the comments that are like, well, it just doesn't matter. What, the important thing is we live at eternity. Amen. We all agree on that. Now let's take some time, have some fun, open the text up with each other. But I also welcome disagreement. I welcome pushback. I welcome cross-examination. I've been cross-examining other views. You can cross-examine mine, just like that comment there. And so I appreciate those comments. If there's any follow-up, if there's enough that I left unaddressed that I need to do another one, I certainly will. So keep an eye out for that. As always, as I said at the start, be sure to subscribe to the Church Reset podcast. There, you'll get all of these things for free. All my audio goes up there, and jackwilkie.co is the website where all of my work goes up as well. Free email list over there. And if you want to support me in the work I do there and at Focus Press, there's also information on my website as well. So I want to thank everyone for tuning in. As always, make sure you click like before you get out of here. That will help other people see it. It helps a lot in the... let's see. I got one comment here right under the bar. So I'll finish that up. Click like if you're watching here. I'll get to this comment, and then I'll get out of here. What about the idea that those outside of Christ are consciously punished immediately, while those in Christ are unconscious until judgment? For them, it would seem to immediately be with Jesus. I talked a little bit about the soul sleep concept. I don't believe that there's a soul sleep. Again, take the rich man and Lazarus as literal as you will, but Abraham was there not asleep. Moses and Elijah being transfigured seemed to indicate they weren't asleep. I know Samuel said he was resting, but I don't believe in the soul sleep view of this. But again, you're free to believe it or free to push back or cross-examine. So I want to thank everyone who tuned in. A great comment section today. Thanks to everyone who left a comment. And if you have a request for another deep dive Bible study stream like this, be sure to shoot it over. I would love to get some more of these. But again, thanks for tuning in, and I'll talk to you guys on the next one.